Donald Trump fulfilled his pledge to penalize one of the biggest economies in the world for its purchases of cheap Russian oil by imposing 50% tariffs on the majority of U.S. imports from India. The tariffs, which went into force in Washington shortly after midnight on Wednesday, run the potential of seriously harming the Indian economy and significantly upsetting international supply lines. Trump announced intentions to quadruple the 25% U.S. tariffs on Indian imports that went into effect earlier this month. He cited New Delhi's purchases of Russian energy, which the White House has claimed indirectly funds Russia's conflict against Ukraine. Since returning to the White House in January, the U.S. president has raised U.S. tariffs on goods from a large portion of the world, causing tensions with both friends and rivals' economies and escalating concerns about rising inflation. With this most recent action, Indian exporters are now subject to some of the harshest U.S. tariffs that Trump has imposed on foreign goods. 50% tariffs on Brazilian exports to the U.S. are another issue. Trump threatens to impose tariffs on nations that discriminate against American technology. India's ministers contend that the nation has unfairly been singled out for its trading ties with Russia, and they warn that as a result, the nation will probably cooperate more with Beijing and Moscow and move away from Washington, although some important products like cell phones are expected to be spared for the time being. The majority of Indian exports to the U.S. were $87.3 billion to the U.S. last year, according to the U.S. Trade Representative, now face high taxes. Earlier this week, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security confirmed the action in a notification which led some economists to forecast a sharp decline in trade between the two nations. On his social network, Truth Social, last month, Trump asserted, "I don't care what India does with Russia. I don't care if they take down their dead economies together." The atmosphere in India has been belligerent. Narendra Modi encouraged Indians to purchase domestic oil, but the administration has refused to stop buying Russian oil. The Prime Minister urged retailers to put up large posters promoting homegrown goods on Tuesday, saying we should all adhere to the maxim of purchasing online made in India goods. "The tariffs may put more pressure on us, but we'll take it," he continued. Santanu Sengupta, the senior economist for India at Goldman Sachs, cautioned that if 50% levies are maintained, GDP growth may fall below 6% from the projected level of roughly 6.5%. Due to decreasing U.S. tariffs, rival exporters from Thailand are already luring American consumers with lower-priced offers. Approximately 30% of India's $27.6 billion worth of exports to the U.S., which include electronics, pharmaceuticals, raw materials for drugs, and refined fuels, are duty-free. However, industries that have historically relied on the American market, such as seafood, textiles, and gems and jewelry, are seeing a decline in their order books. "It is very difficult to export at a 50% tariff," Sengupta stated. "The results are already apparent. Textile and clothing producers in Tirupati and Surat have already stopped production because of worsening cost competitiveness." According to the Federation of Indian Export Organizations, according to FIO, President S.C. Ralhan, Indian goods have been rendered uncompetitive compared to competitors from China, Vietnam, Cambodia, the Philippines, and other Southeast and South Asian countries. Prior to the levies, Indian stocks fell sharply. On Tuesday, the benchmark BSE Sensex fell 1%, or 849 points, to 80,876 in Mumbai. Nearly a third of shipments in important industries like textiles, jewelry and gems go to the U.S., India's biggest export destination, underscoring the possible economic damage. The largest damage, even if the trade dispute subsides, is likely to be confidence in future ties with Washington. Trump has failed miserably. According to a senior Indian trade official who asked to remain anonymous, the hard work between the two countries, which inherently did not trust each other but still managed to build a solid strategic relationship, is now at risk. The person went on to say, the countries must cooperate at a working level, but neither can afford to appear weak politically. The External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar accused the West of duplicity and referred to Washington's demand that New Delhi cease purchasing Russian crude as unjustified and unreasonable, pointing out that Europe trades with Russia significantly more frequently. India would need to replace almost 42% of its oil imports in order to avoid the additional U.S. tariff. Trump has charged India with indirectly supporting Russia's conflict against Ukraine by purchasing Kremlin crude, but he hasn't done the same against China, another significant buyer, as part of his efforts to put an end to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He has also attempted to diffuse tensions with Moscow by inviting Vladimir Putin to a summit in Alaska earlier this month and even suggesting a trilateral meeting with Vladimir Zelensky. Jaishankar stated that US-India trade negotiations are still ongoing despite the tensions. "We need to talk since we are two large nations," he stated. "The lines are not cut." India's refusal to open its agricultural market to U.S. farm commodities out of concern for the country's impoverished farmers crushed earlier hopes for a trade agreement capping tariffs at 15%. Jaishankar recently traveled to Moscow to meet with the Russian president, who is anticipated to visit New Delhi later this year as part of India's shift toward Russia. which it refers to as a all-weather friend, in an effort to mend ties after a deadly 2020 Himalayan conflict placed them in a deep freeze. Modi will also travel to China for the first time in 7 years to attend the Shanghai Cooperation Organization conference. India will approach China cautiously, but not fully. According to a senior Indian official who wished to remain anonymous, there is a trust factor from the past with China, and a lot of history to reconcile. But the reality is that India must do business with China.